Okay, so let's dig into some challenges, specific challenges.
Okay,
for,
sounds fun.
Yeah, for Scrum Masters, leaders, and product owners. So
okay.
First of all, for Scrum Masters, I really get this question often. How can a Scrum Master be listened to so that they can get their message to their teams, to their managers, to top management?
Okay. Yeah, I hear this a lot too. So one of the things that I recommend for people is to be a good servant leader, right? A good servant leader puts the needs of other people before themselves. And so by being a servant leader, you put people first and that you show that you care, right? And you look for opportunities to help people grow both personally and professionally. So let me give you a story of one of our learners on our online education program. His name is Das. And he was working through a challenge in his organization. And the challenge was a pretty tricky one, actually. The issue was he was working in a big organization and the product owners were not dedicating time to reduce technical debt. They were just focusing on features, features, features. Very common behavior for organizations, right? And technical debt, if people aren't familiar, is all these little shortcuts that people take, which is another challenge, to get the product to market, usually as a result of pressure. Usually that pressure comes from the business, but it can come from technical management because they're working under deadlines. And so this technical debt was adding up. It was not being paid off. And so Das recognized this issue and it was causing an impact on the morale of the team. And so he started working to resolve this challenge. But what he did is he first talked to his own manager and said, listen, here's a problem that we have in the organization. I've been observing the impact. Here is what I think is going to be the long-term impact. And he said, what should I do? And so his manager said, thank you for bringing this to my attention. He says, let's go talk to our VP. They talked to the VP and the VP was unaware of this issue. And the VP suggested, the vice president suggested, go talk to your chief product owner, so the boss of all the product owners. And so Das went there and set up a meeting to talk with the chief product owner. He came prepared with some data, but little did Das know was that all of the product owners were there. And so he was a little bit surprised. But what he did was he was really patient. He listened, so he used his really good communication skills, and he listened to their perspective. And then because he was prepared, he was able to talk about his perspective, the impact of the morale on the team, but also really tie it to dollars and cents. He says, if we don't make this investment in reducing the technical debt, we are going to pay this amount of money, this amount of time in the future. And while he didn't convince all of the product owners, he did convince the chief product owner to say, hey, in the next release train, so they're doing Scaled Agile Framework, SAFe, he said, in the next release train, we want to dedicate some time to pay down the technical debt. And that really showed that Das could work the system, but also do it to improve the lives of the team. And so how do you become listened? How did he become listened? He was successful at working at resolving little challenges within the team that his own manager and his vice president had confidence that he could resolve this bigger challenge. And so my answer is be helpful. Start fixing things in a small way, and people will recognize that, and they'll give you that opportunity to fix the bigger things. Okay?
All right.
Yep.
Nice. Now, the second challenge is continuous learning, because you start being a Scrum Master, you have a training, then maybe you have some coaching, and then you're left more or less alone. So often Scrum Masters ask me, how do I learn? Because I have these meetings, I have the things to do. So how do you deal with continuous learning as a Scrum Master?
Well, I think continuous learning is very, very important. I first got involved in the Agile community in 2001 with extreme programming. I got involved in Scrum in 2005. And it has always been a process of continuous learning for me. And so to me, the first thing you need to do is really dedicate yourself to continuous learning. And because I started out in tech and development, and as you know, there is just constant learning of tools, technologies, platforms, frameworks, and the art of writing software. And so you need to read new things, right? And so dedicate yourself to this idea and then start reading new books, right? Reading new books, and you could read books, you could read blogs, you can watch videos. There's a lot of different things that you can do on continuous learning. I would also say in the last 3 to 5 years, there's been a lot more advanced education that's available for people beyond the basics at the Scrum Master level. So there's the IC Agile certifications. They have a whole path. The Scrum Alliance has created a path of certifications beyond Scrum Master. Scaled Agile Framework, it has a lot of different trainings. So part of my answer to this is get some more training. And maybe not even just training in Agile and Scrum, but learn more about facilitation, learn about coaching, learn about architecture, learn about product management. As Scrum Masters, you need to learn many different things and many things outside of software development to be successful and effective. Oh, and the last thing, practice. You always have to practice.
But there is a bit of a controversial thing here in continuous learning. So what do you do? Do you take company time or do you take your own time?
Company time. I know the answer to that one. Because the company is going to benefit from you learning, right? The company is going to benefit you from you learning these new skills. And to me, I think it's important. And as a Scrum Master, when you spend time learning at the company, you send the signal to other people that it's okay to learn at work. Because if the Scrum Master isn't going to dedicate time to learn at work, guess what? The team members won't. No one will. Sometimes you might have to clear that with your boss first. Now, I'm not saying that all 40 hours a week is spent learning, but I think it's important for Scrum Masters to spend a half an hour every day or 3 to 4 hours a week learning something new, because the company is going to benefit from this.
Okay. Another thing is about Scrum Masters is how do you communicate with top management? So it's clearly, if you come from tech, if you come from, I know, being a tester or a programmer or an analyst or something, it's clear that you talk in a different way than someone who's a VP or a CEO that has less time and they want maybe they want things faster, they want clear information. So how would you do that as a Scrum Master? How do you learn to communicate with top management?
Well, here are some tips and tricks that I have learned over the years. Number one, you have to keep it brief. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen technical people go on with long explanations that business leaders don't really care about.
And get into details.
You got to keep it brief. I hate to say this. Sometimes you need to talk like executives, like they're 12-year-old children. Real simple phrases, really short, because sometimes that's their attention span. For most business leaders, if they're highly technical, you can get away with a little bit more detail. So you have to keep it brief. You've got to get rid of the jargon. And the other thing that I would say is you have to find out what their problems are. Or if you want to talk to a senior leader, they don't really want to hear a lot about your problems. In most cases, you're probably an employee. They hear a lot of employees complaining. And so what you want to do is figure out, how do I help that leader solve their problems? And if you can figure out a way that your problem helps them resolve their problem, that's a double win.
It's a win-win situation.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I would add is talk dollars and cents, or euros and euro cents. I think in that case is really talk the language of business. Right? Talk about things that they care about, because senior leaders at that level, they really are optimizing on money.
Often when I explain this, Scrum Master says, yeah, but we don't have the budget. So what do? You don't have cents or money, or you just have time or effort. Or
ask. I think I would ask and say, hey, if we spend, like, say I was talking with you, right? And you were senior leader in whatever organization, and I said, hey, we're going to spend a month on this, and you look at me a little strange, I might say, how much does that cost us? I mean, if you don't know, ask, right? It's better to know that before you come to the executive. But if you don't, they'll tell you, right? And that's an opportunity to learn and say, hey, I'm bringing this to you because I'm concerned about it. I think it's impacting our bottom line. I don't know how much this costs, but I want to know. Where can I learn?
Okay, great. So let's go to another area, challenges for leaders.
Ah, yes.
So the market is changing, right? And if we do these transformations, we change the way of work. What do leaders need to do differently if we want to have a faster paced market? Maybe we introduce things like Scrum or Save or Less or whatever that definitely makes the leaders act in a different way. So what do they need to do differently?
Well, I think there's a couple of things I like to share with people. And in the new way of working, right, this agile way of working, this way that's focused more on customer satisfaction, focus on higher quality, right, we have to kind of recognize that the people who are closest to the work have the most information about the work, and we wanted to give them the most opportunities to make most of the decisions. Notice I didn't say all, right? I'm not saying that people closest to work get to make all the decisions, right? But we want to try to figure out how do we give those people closest to the work the information they need so they can make most of the decisions because they're closest to it, right? They can respond to it faster. So that's one thing. So one thing is, how do you communicate what you know as a leader to the team so that they can make these decisions as well or perhaps better than you? Okay. Another thing that I would recommend to leaders today is let go of the results, and that means you're going to have to trust your team, right? And by letting go of the results and letting the team own it, then you focus on the leader of making sure that they know the right things to make the right decisions, and they have the environment that will allow them to succeed. Now, there's a caveat to this, right? And trusting your team is important, and our CEO says this all the time. Trust is given where trust is earned.
Yeah.
And so if you have a team that has not been very trustworthy, then we've got to get them to that point first so that you can entrust them with more responsibilities. So the way that here's the challenge, right? In order to have trust, you have to make yourself vulnerable. So you're going to have to go of something little and see how they do. And if they do great, then you give them a little bit more, and you give them a little bit more.
Because otherwise you might have this vicious circle, like I don't want to give them, they don't deliver, so we keep things too compact and too distant. So then we don't have this velocity needed in this faster paced environment.
And for the leader, it becomes really stressful because now you have to manage everything, right? And I know managers and leaders get paid more than employees and staff, but I don't think they get paid that much more to manage absolutely everything, right? And so, like I said, let go of the results, empower the team to make most of these decisions, not all, give them the information they need, and give them what they need to succeed. So I think that's one of the Agile principles. Give people the environment that they need so that they can succeed. So.
About leaders, so now because they changed the way they work, they changed a bit the environment. So typically what do managers do? They stay in meetings, right?
Yeah.
So what would you recommend, or how would you teach a leader to deal with these many meetings they have and they had, and everybody is used to having that person in a meeting, but now they need to be maybe closer to the teams, to the people, and they should adjust their schedule to have this time as well. So what would you recommend them?
Well, I mean, leaders need time to think. And that's one of the lessons I learned a long time ago from one of my mentors. And he used to block out, and here's a tip, right? He used to block out hours in his schedule, and he'd have it as a meeting. But he told me, he's like, listen, I have these meetings, but they're just my thinking time because I need time to think. Yeah. And he says, for you, Carl, he says, you can come and interrupt me during my thinking time. So that's one thing, like block out time in your schedule so you have time to think and do your work. Hopefully many managers already know this. The other thing is, if you don't have to be at the meeting, don't be there. Right? In a lot of meetings, sometimes people invite managers either as required or optional, but they don't really need to be there. It's kind of I need to invite the boss so that the boss knows I'm doing something. If you don't need to be there, don't be there. So just say, no, I'm not going to make it. Now, the next thing I would say is, if you are going to be in a meeting as a leader, is make sure you have a clear purpose. Like, what is the purpose of this meeting? Why are we interrupting people for an hour? We're bringing together 10 people. What's the purpose of it? And is it worth bringing 10 people there? Are we going to get more value out of it rather than not having it at all, or maybe having less people? So if you don't have a clear purpose, I would ask the person who's either requesting your presence to define a clear purpose, like a clear outcome, or just don't go. Right? If someone can't tell you what the purpose of it is, it's not worth it going. The next thing I would say is there has to be an agenda, a reasonable set of steps that you can read as a leader to say, okay, by the end of this meeting, we'll achieve this purpose. And if whoever's inviting you doesn't have an agenda that looks realistic, either don't go or work with that person to try to make it better, right? So,
yeah. All right. With leaders, again, they change this approach and they have this new way of working. How would they manage their time? Because, time is limited and you need to do so many things, and maybe you need to delegate some or just not stop doing some things. What would you recommend to a leader how to time manage this?
Well, actually, that was an interesting idea that he brought up, delegation. That's actually one of the most powerful tools that managers have, right? And delegating down to staff is a very powerful technique. If managers hoping to be a servant leader, then you can look for opportunities for members of your staff to grow into leadership positions. So you can delegate. Another thing that I share with leaders, and I say to them, which is very much related to the Scrum principle of prioritization, what is the most important thing that we need to be doing right now? Right? And everything else don't do, which is related to this idea of maximizing the amount of work not done, right? A leader's time and attention is very important. So if it doesn't require your time and attention, you don't need to do it. Delegate or just say, hey, it's not going to get done. I know that's ideal, but eventually you've got to figure out how do you get your schedule in balance with the amount of time that you have, right?
About product owners.
Yes,
so
product owners.
There are many challenges with product owners. Now, the first and foremost problem with product owners that I get is, look, now I train myself, maybe I'm a junior or, beginner product owner. How can I grow into a real product owner that has all the responsibilities and can drive the product? Well, one of the things that I've observed over the many years of working in the Agile community, working in Scrum, is there's different types of product owners, right? And every organization implements product ownership a little differently. The vision is that the product owner is someone who sets business direction, they're a visionary about the product or service, and they are what I call a player. They are engaged with the stakeholders in either setting the direction or helping set the direction. And so when I talk about that, it's like, hey, you're there at the table, you have a voice, you have a perspective, and it is listened to. Now, it doesn't always mean you're going to win, right? But it means that when you say something, people will consider it, and if it's reasonable and rational, it makes good business sense, they'll accept it. And if it's not, you'll either be questioned or they'll say, hey, listen, it's not going to work this time. We're not going in that direction. Thank you. We really appreciate that you're engaged and this is great, but we don't agree. So how do you get to the table? You ask. Okay.
Right? It goes back to this idea that if you don't ask, you don't get. Right? And you ask to be part of those conversations. The other thing I would say is that you really want to ask and learn about what are the business objectives for this product or service? What sort of impact are we trying to make with the product? And the impact is the long-term accumulation of the various outcomes, right? Okay.
Product owner typically has this issue with prioritization, right? So most often we have this prioritization issue. So what would you recommend a product owner to learn how to prioritize better the features?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to prioritize. I hear this question very frequently. How do I prioritize the product backlog? So the first thing when we think about in Scrum is business value, right? We prioritize according to business value, but what does business value mean? Well, the nice thing, if you think about Scrum, business value is essentially whatever the product owner says it is, right? It's a variable concept, right? And by definition in Scrum, something has the most business value when it's at the top of the product backlog. That's by definition, right? And so that's important, right? Think about business value. But what are some techniques to prioritize according to business value? Well, the first thing I would think about is a technique called now, next, and later. So you look at your product backlog and say, what do we need to do now? What's next? And what do we need to do later? Right? Very, very simple, but it actually really helps a lot. The next thing that I would think about, let me think, is a little bit more sophisticated. And the way to maybe to think about creating a forced ranked list is something called 2020 Vision. So that is an innovation game created by Luke Homan. And essentially what you do is a pairwise comparison where you create a forced ranked list from 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down. And you just compare two items, one to another. It's a very powerful technique, something you can do by yourself or with other stakeholders. And then I would say another technique is dot voting. And dot voting is or multi-voting is another technique. This one now you would definitely engage with your stakeholders where you give them multiple numbers of votes. I usually use stickers to say, help me prioritize this based on business value. And let's say you have maybe 20 items in your backlog, which is actually quite small for most backlogs. But let's say you have 20, you'd give people anywhere between 9 and 11 votes. They distribute them, and that would help you prioritize. And notice now we're starting to move this idea of ask the stakeholders how to prioritize. Don't try to make all the decisions yourself. The last one, which is a little more complex, another innovation game, is called Buy a Feature. And in that case, in Buy a Feature, you give people fictitious money, either fictitious euros or dollars or whatever you want to use. And they bid on items in your backlog that they think are most valuable. And again, now we're really getting the customers and end users engaged in this prioritization technique. So you can start from now, next, later. You can then do 2020, dot voting, and buy a feature. Okay?
Sounds great.
Yeah.
For a product owner, what would you do from a strategic versus tactical point of view? Like you have this long view, like medium to long term, and then the very short time decisions. What would you recommend the product owner to do from these 2 points of view?
Interesting. So there's a couple of ways to think about it. From the strategic point of view, that is really trying to understand who your customer is, what is the product vision, defining your value proposition, and thinking about your roadmap, right? That's really a lot of that modern product discovery process that was Lean Startup and Steve Blank and Alex Osterwalder. That's a lot of the strategic work that's done. And really getting involved and talking to customers and end users and getting out of the office, right? And getting to the real market need. Now, the tactical point of view is a lot of the things that you do in Scrum. So you think about prioritizing your product backlog, building product in the form of features and executing on requirements documents. So that is, in the context of Scrum, would be sprint planning or just some type of planning structure, and then a regular cycle of reviews. So that way you can incorporate the feedback from your stakeholders. This kind of, hey, we built something, take a look at it, and then feed that back into your product backlog. So there's kind of this experience of product backlog refinement in Scrum, or just kind of elaboration of the requirements in a non-Scrum context. So that's kind of the tactical things, is just work your backlog, prioritize it, demo it to the stakeholders, incorporate their feedback into the product backlog. Right.
All right. Sounds great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to have this interview. Cool. And see you more, in Romania, in Europe, or wherever around the world.
I'm sure you'll probably see me again. I'm over here in Portugal now, and I'm sure we'll come back and do some more interesting work in Romania. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Coming next.
A program that has in the middle pure functions, and around the pure functions has the input-output stuff. That for me is a nominal format for design.
Okay.
right? And this doesn't mean that this is how every program should be constructed. It just means that you can write every program like this. And that's an interesting property, right?